Hey, it's you, man, from KC95 here. Good evening and welcome to Toasted Tavern. Your host, Scott Tobin, and the man called Wags are ready to bring you the night in sports. So pull up a stool, grab a drink, and let's get toasted.
Well, good evening and welcome into the Toasted Tavern. I am Michael Wagon-Connect, joined alongside, as always, by Scott Tobin for another week of lots and lots of sports talk. We've got a fully packed show for you today. We've got NHL talk going on as the Blues are in action right now as they make a playoff push. We got the NFL Combine where we had some local standouts that were really showing out this weekend. We got some NFL news as far as some teams making trades, other ones keeping guys around. Spring training is in full swing. We got some surprises on the Cardinals side of things, and then we have to talk about it because it's coming up quick. It's March Madness time approaching, so we got a lot of college basketball talk in the works for today as well, plus a semi-announcement of something we're going to be doing around March Madness as well. But before we get into all of that, Scott, man, how are you doing? It's been seemingly a very long week. It seems like it was forever ago that we talked, but how are things going for you, man?
Well, man, everything was good. Good week, busy week, but I'm good and happy and ready to talk some sports.
That's the best way to go about it. I mean, it's one of the best times of the year. NHL and NBA playoffs are quickly approaching. Baseball's back in full swing. We're talking about the NFL draft. We've got the XFL. The UFL getting ready to start back up again. College basketball. I mean, it is absolutely jam-packed. One of the best times of the year if you're a sports fan. And it's always great when you're happy, healthy, and talking sports.
Yeah. It makes everything better when you're able to talk sports and have positive things in the sports world to talk about.
Very, very true. Well, let's jump right into it then. Let's talk about one of those positive things. I know this is a bit of a surprise, but we are talking about the St. Louis Blues. And yes, they are going streaking. They successfully finished something that they've been trying to do all year, which was win 3 games in a row. And in fact, they actually stretched it out to 4 games in a row coming into tonight's game against Dallas, which just now has reached the end of the second period with the Stars leading 4-3 in a very, very back and forth game between these two teams. But before we get into kind of how tonight's game is going, let's kind of step back and look at what's happened since the Four Nations tournament has taken place. Obviously, the Blues came out, lost in a shootout to Winnipeg, but then have rattled off 4 straight wins, including games against the Colorado Avalanche and Alexander Ovechkin and the Washington Capitals. It's been a big, big change for the St. Louis Blues team. And you look at it and you go, what is the difference? Why? Why are the Blues right now playing the best hockey that they've been playing?
They've played consistent hockey. You know, they've come out and just played solid, consistent, smart hockey, and they've looked like a good hockey team. They look like a team that's on the same page and everybody's pulling in the same direction instead of everybody kind of playing for themselves, which we saw a lot of in the first part of the season.
100%. Zach Bolduc has really emerged here the last couple of games as well. He scored tonight. He had a couple of goals the last couple of games as well. So he's really started to come on a little bit. We saw Philip Broberg put in a couple of goals against Washington. So guys that maybe had been on a bit of a cold streak came in and have really started to amp themselves up here the last couple of weeks. Dylan Holloway has scored tonight. You got Braden Shen continuing to play well. Robert Thomas now has 10 straight games with a point, 10 straight games with an assist. So he is really started to show up. Our top players are starting to show up. Buchnevich has a goal or 2 here in the last couple of games as well. So the guys that you said were playing individually have now started to come together, and that's given them the chance to pick up 5 points in 5 of the last 5 games. Essentially, they've got the 1 point against Winnipeg and now have won the 4 straight, and that's put them 1 point out of a playoff spot with the trade deadline approaching on Friday. And we talked a little bit about this last week about what the mindset is for the Blues. What do they have to do to get to a point where maybe they have to change what their thought process is for the trade deadline? And regardless of how tonight's game turns out, with still another game to go before the deadline, do you see the mindset having been changed? Is it we've got to go out there and instead of trading a Braden Shen or having people contact us about Jordan Binnington, it's about, okay, maybe we do look at potentially adding a piece here at the deadline?
Man, it's so hard to say what they're going to do right now. I mean, I think Army has to have almost had his mind somewhat set even before this streak, because we've seen this team tease you before in past years and previous years where all of a sudden they go on a hot streak and they win 4 or 5 and you're like, oh man, here they go. And then what happens if you keep everybody in they don't pull off this game in Dallas tonight, and then you lose 5 in a row all of a sudden, and you don't make any moves, and then you're stuck going, man, we were fooled by what we saw for 4 or 5 game stretch. Do you go with what you've seen for most of the season, or what you've gone with what you've seen for the last 4 games? So I mean, that's the thought process. And then I guess you really have to question yourself and ask yourself, what is this team? I mean, are they good enough? Is this team good enough if you get in the playoffs to make a run and win a series or two? Or are they just good enough to get into the playoffs? Because I think if you're looking at it and you go, man, we're good enough to just sneak into the playoffs. Well, yes, I know that was the goal for this year, to get in the playoffs. And I know, the money that you make from a playoff series round is huge. But is it really worth keeping some guys that maybe you could trade and get some pieces that help you be even better next year to make a more substantial run in the playoffs? So I think that's what it comes down to, is what does Army and ownership look at this team and see? Do they look at it as a legitimate team that could make a run in the playoffs, or a team that gets in and gets blown out in the first round, or barely sneaks by in the first round? I think that's what they really have to ask themselves this week.
Well, and the incredible thing is we've actually seen both sides of this coin with this organization over the last handful of years. Back in 2018-19, they went on a 11-game winning streak. Well, they did that early enough, I think, in the second half of the season that it gave them that picture of, okay, this team is starting to come together, starting to gel, and starting to push forward. So they did. They made the moves that they needed to make, and then they end up obviously winning the Stanley Cup. But on the flip side, we saw in another season where this team did make a little bit of a push near the deadline. And instead of bringing people on, he traded a guy like Paul Stastny away in a team on a team that was still needing help at the center position. So Armstrong has made that tough decision and seen where this team has been going in different moments and has made those decisions. So it's not like we're sitting there and going, well, he only makes moves to when they're on streaks. He doesn't actively look at these things. No, he does actively look at this team and how they're coming together and all that. And that's what makes this trade deadline very, very tricky, because I think you're starting to see that gelling and that team coming together for Jim Montgomery, where they could make a bit of a run. They might be able to get in and win a playoff series, but did it come a little bit too late to where you haven't seen enough of them playing as a team to sit there and justify making a deal to bring somebody in? I still think, if anything, this team is going to stand pat, maybe get rid of one of those lower third or fourth line guys just to make a move and maybe open something up for a Dalibor Dvorsky to come up and play late in the season, or a Jimmy Snuggerud once Minnesota either wins the Frozen Four or gets eliminated. So that is my thinking. And if somebody comes along and just absolutely blows you away with an offer for Braden Shen, I still think you have to look at it. I still think you have to think really hard about making that deal, because as you said, if you don't feel like you can make any waves in the playoffs, if you can set yourself up by getting younger, taking some money off the books, and making yourself better for the next couple of years, you definitely have to look at it. I don't want to actively trade or put Braden Shen out there, but if someone comes along and says, hey, we're going to give you this guy who's a top-tier talent, a couple of picks, including a first-rounder, you have to entertain that.
I agree with you. I think you have to do that. I think you have to do the same thing with Jordan Bennington. I don't think you actively shop him, but if somebody comes knocking and says, hey, we're going to give you this massive package because we loved what Bennington did at the Four Nations tournament, we know he's a winner in big games, and we think we've got a shot. If that comes along, then the same thing. I think you have to look at it, because, if we're being realistic, I think this team is still probably 2 or 3 years at least away from being a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. So, I think if that offer comes along, you have to look at it. I'm with you. I don't know that you actively shop those guys, but if somebody comes along with an offer, and bangs on your door and says, hey, we really need these guys, that we think they're the missing piece, then you have to look at that and say, okay, we're not going to win a cup in the next couple of years. Yeah, these are important pieces, but we can add some pieces that really are the building blocks that maybe speed that process up a little bit. And instead of 3 years, it's 2 years or something until you're a legit cup contender.
And I get that with the Braden Shen side of things, because he is getting older, but it is harder for me to entertain the thought of a Jordan Bennington being moved, mainly because what we've seen, from the backup position has been solid, but not spectacular. Joel Hofer tonight was pulled after the first period, giving up 3 goals, including a goal with 1.2 seconds left in that first period against a Dallas team that, if you're looking at it, the Blues have absolutely dominated in this game so far. 33 shots to 16 for the Stars. They're blocking shots. They're putting hits on. They're winning faceoffs, although they are down in the faceoff battle right now. But, in a game where that if you win, you can jump into that second wild card spot to have your goalie come in. Yes, it's second game of a back-to-back, third game in 4 days. So there's a lot of tired legs out there, but you need your goalkeeper to be able to come in and stop a team and keep you in it to give you a chance to pick up the points that you desperately need. And I think if you're going to make the move, with Shen to try and shorten your Stanley Cup, wait time in a sense, I don't feel like you can get rid of Binnington at the same time and expect this team to be a Stanley Cup contender. So it's like you look at it and you go, well, if trading Braden Shen to, say, a Toronto cuts a year or a year and a half off of your time frame of when you're a Stanley Cup contender again, I think you kind of have to probably look at doing that. But at the same time, if you make that deal and then someone else comes along and wants to trade for Binnington, and that adds a year and a half back onto it because you don't have a goalkeeper that you fully trust, then it's almost like you packed away your future and sent it away because you didn't feel like you were moving forward. But I get it. I mean, it's one of those things. Those deals have to be made at some points. I just don't see that being the case this year. I really, and I know I've been bullish on Jordan Binnington since the absolute beginning. We had people that were, railing against the contract that he signed, his extension, and I was behind it fully the entire time. Even when he's been struggling, I've been a Jordan Binnington supporter and really just pushing him because I know that he is not a guy that is going to go out there and stand on his head completely the entire season. He's not an Andrei Vasilevsky. He's not a Sergei Bobrovsky or guys like that where it seems like day in and day out they are putting together the best games of their season in that game. He's going to have his moments. He's going to let in soft goals. Those things are going to happen. But you need a winner-take-all game, even if it's not in Boston. I know he's 2-0 there in winner-take-all games. But if you need a goalie in a winner-take-all situation, I want Jordan Binnington in net. And if we're going to find a way to shorten the Stanley Cup run window, I want him as my keeper, regardless of who else gets traded away.
No, I understand that. And don't get me wrong, I don't think they'll trade. I honestly don't believe they're going to trade either one of them because I really think they're going to stand pat and not really do anything. But I think it would be one or the other. I don't think they would trade Shen and Binnington. I think somebody's going to have to come along with an offer that blows them away. But I don't think they would move both of them in the same year. The thing I will say about Binnington, so how old is Jordan Binnington now? What is he, 33, something along those
32,
lines?
33, something along those lines, yeah.
So, and while I understand you want to have him, and he's a big game goalie, if you're looking at it and you're going, okay, our window to win a Stanley Cup is probably 2 years, 3 years, maybe 4 years away. What is Jordan Binnington at 35, 36, 37 years old? Is he the guy? Is he the same guy? Is he a big game goalie at that point? Or have you moved on to Joe Holford? Because, again, if you're looking at it that way and saying our real window isn't for another 3 or 4 years, Jordan Binnington's not going to be prime Jordan Binnington at that time. Joel Hofer's probably going to be more of the number one, and Binnington's probably going to slid to more of a number two guy at that point in time just because of his age and everything else. Then I think you have to say, okay, maybe if somebody does come along with that offer, you do make that move to try to get some young pieces that will be bigger pieces in 2 to 3 years. I mean, that's just the way I look at it.
Well, I think both of us are going to be surprised about this. Jordan Binnington actually just 31 years old. Okay. So that does change the storyline just a little bit because, yeah, instead of being 34, 35, he'd be 32, 33. So that's still a pretty good piece of your prime there. And you know what? And I look at this and, again, you're not comparing – you don't want to compare Hall of Famers to guys that are currently, in the league and going at it this point right now. But look at how deep Martin Brodeur went. Look at how deep Patrick Waugh went in their careers as far as age and being able to be done. Look at Marc-Andre Fleury. He's in, that 40 age range and still playing very, very well. It's not like back in the day where, you get to be 35 and you slow down. I'm not saying this is every goaltender. Not every goaltender. And, when you get to your mid-30s, you slow down. You do. But in some cases, you're going to have goalies that will be able to last into their 37, 38, 39 age range and still be a very, very good keeper. And, again, not comparing Binnington to those guys as in Brodeur or Waugh or Fleury or anything like that. But he does have some of that makeup where you could see him being successful later in his career because he started at the NHL level later in his career as well. Late 20s when he finally got his shot, obviously won the Stanley Cup. So not saying he doesn't have the wear and tear on him because he's played goalie the entire time, but he doesn't have the wear and tear at the NHL level. So maybe that gives him some longevity as well. But that's thinking way, way into the future. And at that point, maybe Joel Hofer does rise up and really take hold of that position. If that's the case, if Binnington's still a highly successful keeper, then yeah, maybe you do either let him walk at the end of the contract or see if somebody will make a move. But it's why I don't ever want to be a GM, because I get hooked on some of these players and I'm like, nope, not going to happen, when in some instances, maybe you do need to get rid of somebody.
Yeah, sometimes you have to be able to cut that cord. And, we've seen Army be able to do that. He doesn't let emotion sway his decisions. We've seen him move on from some pretty popular players in this city and just say, yep, it's time. We got to cut the cord. So I don't think he would do that. Although by that time, in 2 or 3 years, it won't be Army's decision anymore.
And that's the big question mark, because obviously Alex Steen was a big part of that 2019 Stanley Cup winner. Obviously his goaltender was Jordan Binnington. So will he have grown to that point where he can make that decision of, if I need to cut bait, I need to cut bait, or I can't sign him to this contract because we need to spend the money elsewhere? That's going to be the big question mark. And it's good. And this is why I love the Blues succession plan, the way they have it set up right now, is because he has the ability to learn, to look and see what Doug does and see how he makes those tough decisions, and is able to kind of mold his decision-making process around what he's seeing, where in a lot of instances, the guy just gets shoved in to the role and he still plays and does things with the human player's heart versus what it actually means to be a GM for a team, making those financial and business decisions. So having a year or two where he can kind of learn and grow and see what Doug does, I think will prove beneficial for Alex Steen. But at the same time, there is that still little piece of that nugget in his heart that goes, man, this is my goalie. This is the guy that helped me win a Stanley Cup. Can I move on from him? So that'll be the big thing to look at going forward as we get deeper into the contract for Binnington in the next couple of years.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's going to be really interesting to see what his style and what his philosophies are and how they differ from the way Army's done things. And, there will be some differences because every person's different, and how he approaches the game, how he looks at things, how he wants to build an organization. So, we could be in for some real drastic changes. You never know. He may come in and say, okay, Binnington was our goalie. He was my guy. He did help me win a cup, but I want to have my signature. I want to have my stamp on this team. So I want to move on and do things totally different and bring in my people and really make my mark. So we just don't really know how he's going to approach it.
Here comes Team Sweden. That's all I'm going to say. They're just going to bring the entire Team Sweden, put it in there, and be done with it, which not a bad thing, because, they proved themselves pretty handily in that Four Nations Cup, which we'll talk about here in just a second. But kind of a final note on the Blues at the moment. Right now, they trail Vancouver by a point for a playoff spot. They're tied with Calgary right now, but Vancouver still has a game in hand. Calgary still has 2 games in hand. So, yes, if the Blues do find a way to come back and win this game tonight against Dallas, they will jump into that second wild card spot, but it's not a true we're in control of our destiny, because the teams that are around them still have games in hand that they need to play in order to see if they can leap above the Blues, if that is the case. So something to watch out for there. And another thing to kind of keep an eye on too is, and this is a stat that gets to me, and I'm not a huge stat head. I'm one of those believers that, the eye test is one of the best indicators of where a player or a team is sitting at right now. But there's always some stat that you look at and you go, that is a kind of a telltale sign of a team that's going to be successful. In Major League Baseball, it's run differential. In the NHL, it's goal differential. The Blues have a -5 goal differential coming into tonight's game. Right now, it's -6. There's only 3 teams that currently hold a playoff spot that have a negative goal differential. That's Detroit in the West, or in the East. They are a -15. They hold that second wild card spot. Minnesota, third in the Central, actually has a -3 goal differential right now. And then Vancouver, the team we're chasing, has a -19 goal differential. So I look at that and I go, okay, I actually would probably give the edge to the Blues over Vancouver if it came down to it. But if they can't get that goal differential into positive territory, that right there shows me that I don't think they can advance out of that first round, because they're a team that doesn't necessarily outscore their opponents. Obviously, by the numbers, they don't. So that goal differential is really going to have to flip for me to have any sort of positivity going into a potential playoff series. And the fact that you have a trade deadline coming up in less than a week, if that doesn't turn around quick, I think that makes Doug Armstrong's decision a lot easier.
Yeah, although I mean, sometimes the goal differential, just like run differential, can be skewed because you can have 2 or 3 bad games and it can make that number jump up and look really bad when you're a lot closer and a lot more consistent than that on a day-to-day basis. You just have 2 or 3 blowups. So I can understand why you go by that and look at it, but again, just like so many numbers, it doesn't take a whole lot for that to get skewed and be kind of out of whack.
I think the biggest thing is if you can maybe look at the last 15, see what the goal differential is there. That might give you a little bit better of an indication. A season long goal differential isn't great because we just saw against Washington. We lost 8-1 to the Capitals here in St. Louis, but then went out there and beat them 4-2. So, it's more so about looking at maybe recent games, last 15, last 20, see what your differential is. And that, again, that just feeds back into my point where stats don't always tell the tale because things like that can change. So you got to be able to blend stats, eye tests, things like that to kind of get that cohesive picture. So in my mind, we'll see what happens. Friday is going to be a potentially busy day across the NHL. And then there are games that night as well. Blues will be in Anaheim on Friday after the trade deadline. So we'll see potentially a newer team come Friday evening. Quickly on the Four Nations, we talked about this last week about the potential of will owners push back on having more of these kind of, exhibition kind of things. And one of the notes was, Matthew Tkachuk, he was injured in that first game against Canada. How long was he going to be out? Well, the Panthers put him on injured reserve today after he suffered a groin injury in that first game against Canada. He hasn't played in any of the games after the tournament. So that is one of those check marks to look at and go, well, how long is he out? And will that make any sort of effect on future involvement by the NHL in these sorts of events? And I still don't think it's a death knell for things like that. But when you have a star player like that, if he misses the entire regular season, comes back for the playoffs, it's exactly what Vegas has done the last handful of years. But if he misses the playoffs, I think that is something to kind of keep an eye on.
Yeah, especially, as influential as he's been in the playoffs, we've seen, what an impact he can make for Florida in the playoffs last couple of years. So, yeah, the NHL definitely doesn't want to lose stars, and have them miss NHL games and playoff games because they're playing in those kind of tournaments. So, while one player isn't going to be the death nail, I think it's something they're definitely going to talk about and look at, depending on, like you said, how long he ends up being out.
100%. All right, let's jump over. Let's talk a little bit of football talk. It's the NFL Combine going on this weekend. 4 Missouri Tigers really kind of featured prominently in this one. And I'll be perfectly honest, I do not want to see Armand Membu coming at me like that in any sort of game at all. But he really showed up and solidified his spot potentially in that first round this week. You had obviously Luther Burden, Theo Weiss, and Brady Cook. But looking at the combine and seeing kind of where those Tigers kind of put themselves into the conversation, as a Tigers fan, you got to be happy with how they've kind of shown up this weekend to solidify some of their spots in the NFL draft. Obviously, Membo will be a guy that's first round pick, maybe top 10. You got Luther Burden, who likely will be a first round pick. Cook has snuck into the conversation of being undrafted now to a potential draftee. There's a lot of positives going for Missouri Tigers football fans.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like you said, Membo was already, a first round pick. A lot of the mocks had him somewhere between, 12 and 15, 16. What he did in this combine may push him to be a top 10 pick. When you have that kind of 40 speed and then your long jump and broad jump are also so impressive and shown that he's a real athlete. That's what teams are looking for out of offensive linemen now. The days of offensive linemen just being big and large and not being able to push them around has kind of gone away. Teams are looking for those athletic guys that can do a little bit of everything as an offensive lineman. So I think that definitely moves his stock up. Luther's going to be a mid-round first pick. I know there have been a couple of mocks here recently that have had him slide back to 25, 26. I think somebody even had him in the second round. That's not going to happen. He's going to be a first-round pick. Somebody's going to take him. Again, he showed a lot in this combine. I heard a lot of people talking about he really impressed them with his route running at the combine, which some teams weren't sure about because of the way the Mizzou plays offense. They weren't sure how good of a route runner he was, but he kind of solidified that in people's minds this week. So I think that really helps him. Theo Weiss is going to be a really interesting guy to watch. I mean, he led Mizzou in receiving yards last year. As much as we talk about Burton, he was a huge weapon. And I think, he was a 5-star coming out of high school. I think Weiss is going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. I don't think he'll fall more than early 3rd round, probably somewhere in the mid 2nd round pick. And then Brady Cook is going to be the interesting one. Like you said, going into the season last year, a lot of people had him being a mid-round draft pick. And then with the injuries and stuff last year, he didn't have as great of a year as you would have hoped just because of the injuries. A lot of people said, well, he may be undrafted. He may be a 6th or 7th round pick. And then he goes to the combine. And from everything we heard yesterday, he really opened up a lot of eyes. He was pinpoint accuracy on all of his throws. They said he really dazzled people with his short and intermediate accuracy. And then he showed that he could throw the deep ball, which was a question. He was apparently just dropping dimes on 50-yard passes yesterday. And the thing people say, oh, wow, he did it in a combine, big deal. But the thing you got to remember about the combine is he's not doing that with receivers that he's worked with before. It's not like he had Luther Burden and Theo Weiss out there. He had guys that he's never played with before running those routes, and he was still hitting them and started doing those things. So that is something that really impresses teams. We'll see how he does on his individual pro day. I think he'll probably impress even more when he does that in Columbia, and he can use his guys, whether he has Weiss or Burden or whoever goes down there and works out with him. So I think that'll be really big. And I think we're going to see him. I think he's going to be, a mid-round pick. And I'm going to make a bold prediction here just from
Go for it.
Things that I've heard even before the combine. I'm going to say that Brady Cook ends up a Pittsburgh Steeler. And I'm going to say by mid-season, Brady Cook is the starting quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, we will mark that down and hang on to that clip right there because that is a big bold prediction for sure.
And, that would be the perfect organization for him to go to.
Yeah.
With Mike Tomlin there and the way that Pittsburgh wants to go back and kind of be a run-first offense to let him break in, have a good running game, and he can be a part of that. He can use his legs. And then, use that short to intermediate passing game and hit some big plays. And, they, like I said, they're a control the ball, play defense type team. So that would be the perfect place for him to go in, kind of get his feet wet, kind of slowly work in a year or two down the road. Well, I said I predict him to be the starter this year, kind of slowly work his way into being more and more of a quarterback from, this year, maybe be more of that game manager type player and then move up. But I think in that system with that team, he can do that and be very successful. And with his willingness to win and his ability to win, I think that's the perfect landing spot for him.
Well, he wouldn't have to change his wardrobe, going from one black and gold to another black and gold. I mean, that just works perfectly for him.
It would. Yeah, it would. Mizzou fans could still support him and wouldn't have to buy a whole new wardrobe.
Well, jumping back to Burden here for a second, I mean, just kind of looking at that first round, obviously quarterback probably is a big deal for the Steelers, but they could potentially look at a wide receiver in that first round as well. But obviously you would need someone to throw to him. But how great would that be if, maybe they take Burden with the 21st pick and then Cook comes in a couple of rounds later and you keep those teammates together and eventually maybe have that connection there. But a couple other teams to look at, a little bit further down in that first round. Again, not sure if he will fall this far, but teams that maybe could trade up and make a pick. You've got the Green Bay Packers, who might be losing a wide receiver or two here in this offseason. They are a team that could look at Luther Burden. The Houston Texans, that would be a fun one for me, would be to see him in a Texans uniform, getting, CJ Stroud showing, throwing him the ball. You got some injuries there with Tank Dell and then free agency for Diggs and Woods. So that's a potential landing spot. One that I think, and I hate saying this, but one team that he could really blossom in, mainly because of the outside support that he might get, would be if he goes to LA and the Rams. You talk about the question marks around his route running, if he, what he was able to do. Obviously, he showed pretty well, but you've got probably one of the best route runners in NFL history that is associated with that franchise, not necessarily working for them, but associated in Isaac Bruce. And if he were to go to the Rams and they were smart, which we all know certain people in that organization are not, but if Sean McVay were smart and he knew he had a guy coming in that didn't necessarily run a ton of routes in college, but has the ability to, and you pair him with an Isaac Bruce to kind of work with him, I think that would be a home run pick for LA if he were to fall to them or if they were able to make a move up in the draft to pick him. And again, I know that that's a hard one and that hurts, but if you got a guy like Matthew Stafford that's there as your quarterback and you're being kind of mentored by one of the greatest route runners in NFL history, that might be a perfect situation for him.
Yeah, I mean, I could see it where that would work. I don't want him to end up with the Rams.
Same.
I don't. That would be a good spot. I think a lot of that will have to do with whether Cooper Kupp is still there because you've got Puka Nacua. So, and they've got a couple of young wide receivers. So that'll be interesting. Another team at the end of the first round to keep an eye on, and a place that would be another perfect place for him because he loves to come up with the exotic plays for his wide receivers. Don't be 100% shocked if Andy Reid and the Kansas City Chiefs don't jump up and try to get him as well.
Well, I was trying not to say them because I didn't want to jinx the potential for them trading up and grabbing him, because that would be one of the best spots for him because it'd still be close to Columbia. There's still those connections with Mizzou and everything there. I mean, obviously Chase Daniel was there for a little while, so there's a lot of Mizzou connections in KC, and the fans wouldn't have to travel very far, and it would be a very, very good spot for him to land. And there were talks, as you said earlier, that he could fall to the end of that first round, which I'm with you. I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't see Buffalo allowing the Chiefs to get ahead of him again for another wide receiver that could be impactful. But if the Chiefs do put something together and make a move up the draft, that could be exactly what they're looking for. And it would not be a bad pick at all for them if they were to make that deal.
No, it would be a great move. Buffalo would be another good place for him. Can you imagine him with Josh Allen?
Oh.
That would be, especially if Amari Cooper ends up not re-signing in Buffalo, that could be a spot. I mean, he's going to be impactful anywhere he goes. I've seen some mocks that had the Eagles jumping up and taking him, which you wouldn't think they would need him with the wide receiving core they have, but that would be another weapon for them. So, yeah, I mean, he's going to have a good landing spot, I believe, and he's super talented. He's going to have a really good career as long as he's able to stay healthy.
Yeah, that's always the big question mark is a guy like that going to stay healthy? He had some stuff here, and it happens, but it's going to be interesting to see where he ends up. And as we get closer to the draft, we'll start looking a little bit deeper at some of these mock drafts and seeing if there's any large disparities between them. But we might be able to kind of zero in on where the landing spot for him would be, at least number wise in the draft, not necessarily team, because obviously deals happen left, right, and out of left field as well. So anything can happen. But if you got an idea of where you can target him number wise in the draft, that might give you a good indication as well. Speaking of the NFL, there are some deals that have been made. We did talk a little bit about Matthew Stafford sticking around with the Rams, which that was always just the weird rumor for me, was that he was even on the block, because if you want to play for a team that has a good offense with some good receivers, a good running back, and a great defense, why would you want to go away from LA? Because you have all of that right there. Even if Cooper Kupp doesn't come back, you still have a very solid receiving core. You've got a good running back, and you've got a great defense right now. So the fact that he was even entertaining making a move to the Giants or the Raiders, that never made sense to me at all. And I think it was really just him angling for an even better deal. But he did get it, and he is going to be back again for the Rams next year. And again, hate to say it because we do not like the Rams, at least the upper part of the management piece of it. A great spot for Stafford, and we hate the fact that he's there.
Yeah. And apparently, the Rams were serious about trading him. An article I read this morning, the Raiders had actually been able to talk to Stafford, and they'd actually come to a deal with Stafford money-wise for a 2-year, $90 million deal that was going to send him to the Raiders. But the Rams were asking for the Raiders' second-round pick this year and their first-round pick next year.
Oof.
And the Raiders weren't willing to give up that much for him at 37 years old. So the deal didn't come to fruition, but they were definitely – it was definitely something that was real. It wasn't just talk or speculation. It got that close that they had figured out compensation and had come to a money agreement with Stafford.
So that means the Rams were really serious about going into next year with Jimmy Garoppolo as their starting quarterback, which, wow, that would have been interesting. I know that there's draft picks and stuff like that. They could have drafted a quarterback and gone with them. But right at the point that they would have traded Stafford, it would have been Jimmy G as the starter for that team.
Yeah, although I don't think it would have been because I think they would have taken their pick. I think their plan was they were going to take their picks and put a package together and jump up to either get Cam Ward or from all accounts, Shador Sanders is who they really wanted.
And not Aaron Rodgers, huh?
No, not Aaron Rodgers with the Rams.
Well,
You know,
speaking of him, though, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the same thing you were about to say. There's our teams apparently that are interested in Aaron Rodgers, one of them being the New York Giants, which I don't see Aaron Rodgers going to the other New York team after what he went through with the Jets. I don't see him going to a Giants team that has even less weapons for him to work with.
Yeah, I'm right there with you as well. I wouldn't understand that decision unless it was complete money grab. And as much as Aaron Rodgers seems to be greedy and a little bit of a D-bag, I don't see him chasing the paycheck. I legitimately believe that he does want to win games and potentially get another championship. Maybe not the exact way he probably should go about it, but I don't think he's chasing money. I think he is still chasing wins. And, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, and with the unresolution of the Sam Darnold situation, that Minnesota team is still sitting out there. And I'm like, the Vikings have the pieces. Like, do they want to make that decision and complete the circle again? The Favre route, now the Rodgers route. And if, Jordan Love's looking at that, maybe he should start looking for apartments in New York here in about another 10 years.
Well, and you just brought on Jordan Love. You ready for the craziest rumor?
Back to Green Bay?
Yes. That possibly people in Green Bay are not as sold on Jordan Love as we all thought they were. And maybe Aaron Rodgers, I think they would have to beg and kiss his ring and everything else to get him to come back to Green Bay. But, I mean, I could see Aaron Rodgers going back there saying, see, I told you weren't better without me.
Yeah, but oh man, and that's a tough one to look at because Love did have some flashes this year. I mean, he really did. He looked like a guy that could lead a team into the playoffs and do very, very well. But then there were moments where he just completely disappeared. So, I mean, I get the sentiment. I get maybe he could come in and win. But at the same time, you look at the Packers' weapons and, they've got a good running back. But if they lose one or two of these receivers that they got now and they don't pick anybody up early in the draft, he's not going to have anybody to throw to. And I know, maybe that means Devontae Adams gets traded back to Green Bay from New York and he starts to maybe he brings in a Randall Cobb again. It's the old guard coming back into Green Bay. But I don't know if the Packers are willing to mortgage their future on that. I mean, I can't say for sure, but do you really think that they would mortgage their future? And again, that's not necessarily saying that Jordan Love is the guy, but he's going to keep him in contention for the next couple of years. So if they draft a quarterback that they feel like could be the next guy, would you want to mortgage that by bringing in an Aaron Rodgers who may only last one more year?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I mean, I don't really think the Packers would do that either because they gave Jordan Love that huge contract. But, just the fact that there's even somebody speculating on that because remember at the end of the year last year, how in love people were with Jordan Love, that he was the next great quarterback. I know people, and I'm going to throw somebody under the bus here, but an ESPN radio personality of St. Louis and Michelle Smallman said she thought he was going to be better than Patrick Mahomes this past season. Going in the preseason, she had him as the best quarterback in the league, and that didn't exactly play out.
Well, I'll say this, though. He did get injured in week 1. And who knows how healthy he was down the stretch there because he also missed some time late in the season as well. But at the same time, you look at it and you go, I don't think anybody could be put ahead of Patrick Mahomes at this point right now. Even with the loss to the Eagles, I mean, what he's able to do out on the field is so magical that I don't think you can put anybody ahead of him right now. So to put a guy like Love up at the top, that was a little bit premature, I think. But on the flip side, the injuries they had to deal with this year, I don't think we got the best of Jordan Love that we could have gotten. So that's another reason why I'm a little bullish on them moving on and trying to bring Rodgers back in. So Maybe a little bit of an overreach there, but at the same time, I don't think it was quite out of the question that he could be one of the top 8 quarterbacks in the league.
Well, and it goes again to how the media likes to take a little tiny sample size and just blow it out of proportion, because you say that, but what is Jordan Love? Because, basically he got paid a ton of money and all this praise, oh, he's the next big thing, on basically about 5 good weeks that he had last year. Because remember, the beginning of the season, he wasn't good at all. He was throwing interceptions all over the place. They were really struggling. Then he got hot. Their defense played well, and they went on a run, and he got them into the playoffs. And everybody's like, oh, man, did you see what he did for those 6 weeks? Yep, he's the next big quarterback. Let's give him, let's make him the highest paid quarterback in the league. And they did. And then he gets hurt, and he has an off and on season. And, the media just wants to anoint the next guy all the time and over exaggerate after two or three good games, basically. I mean, it's just kind of crazy how we do that in all of sports, but especially the NFL and especially young quarterbacks. It's like, just look at CJ Stroud. I mean, CJ Stroud was anointed, oh my God, he's going to be the guy he's going to be the one that pushes Patrick Mahomes. He's the guy. And he had an okay this year, but he wasn't the same quarterback that he was last year. And part of that was because wide receivers were hurt and he didn't have the weapons that he had the year before. But part of it also is that leagues adjusted to him and changed their schemes and changed things up to try to catch up with what he was doing. Now the question is, can he adjust to what the defenses did to him? But I mean, guys have a few good games and we're anointing them the next great quarterback and the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. We need to just calm down and let guys be guys and have them actually build up a resume of more than 8 games before we anoint them the next Joe Montana or the next Tom Brady or the next Patrick Mahomes.
Well, and just looking at it, I mean, I think that's one of those things, the victim of the system that we have right now, as you said. Jordan Love may not have been the best quarterback at the time that he signed. Well, at that time was the richest quarterback for a quarterback in the NFL. But you have to also look at it from Green Bay's perspective as well, because, Trevor Lawrence had just signed his $56.9 million contract. You knew Joe Burrow was coming up. You knew Dak Prescott was coming up. So it was a decision of, okay, we either got to pay this guy now at this price point or run the risk of having to pay him more, because after Love signed his contract at 58.3, Joe Burrow got 61.3. So, you could look at it if you're Green Bay and you go, well, hey, we just saved about $3 million by signing him to this long-term deal at this point, because we knew this guy was coming up and this guy was coming up. So again, it's a bit of a victim of the system as well. And that's the big problem, is you have to basically base it on 5, 6, 7 weeks of a guy's career now, because the next guy is coming up, because you're seeing so many young, successful quarterbacks coming out of multiple drafts that they're going to get paid. And then your guy's either up next or your price tag's going up because the guy after him's getting paid. And that's the system that kind of needs to be broken, essentially.
Well, it is broken. The economics in the NFL is broken, because how disjointed is it that Dak Prescott, who has done nothing in his career basically, is making $50 million a year, and guys like Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, who are the best running backs in the league, are scrapping and fighting and having to go to free agency and different teams to get $9 or $10 million a year.
Yeah, it's absolutely insane.
It doesn't make any sense. The economics of football are broken. And it's why you can't have teams. Why teams can't have a winning windows of more than 2 or 3 years, because once you pay your quarterback, you can't pay these other guys, because you're paying guys $50 million who basically have no business making that kind of. I mean, you want the perfect poster child for that: $293 million that Kirk Cousins has made in his career.
Yeah, 100%. But. Kind of, I don't want to give too much credit, because I think they were kind of pushed into it, but you did have this issue with draft picks for the longest time. I mean, you were basically giving, out of college, for the most part, quarterbacks hundreds of millions of dollars in contract money. And eventually, through collective bargaining, they got to a point where they realized, okay, we cannot be paying these 18, 19, 20-year-olds this amount of money, especially at that first round pick, and them getting blown up and hurt, and then you're on the hook for all that money. And I don't know if it's going to come anytime soon, but that has to be the next kind of thing. And I'm not going to sit there and say salary cap or anything like that, but in the next,
salary cap.
well, yeah, it's true. And that's the crazy thing. Like you have
That's
that.
why you can't keep teams together, because it's so broken. And why you're saying, they changed it, because of Sam Darnold and Sam Bradford and some of those rookie contracts. And while they changed it, they didn't really change it, because while we're not giving them that money their rookie year, we're still giving those guys the same, just like we talked about just a second ago with Dak Prescott. Yeah, we didn't give him $100 million when he was a rookie, but we're doing it now 4 years down the road when he still really hasn't done anything to deserve that money. So while they changed it and they pushed it back, they're still paying undeserving quarterbacks ridiculous amounts of money, which are screwing up your team's salary cap. They didn't really fix the problem. They basically just kicked it down the road is what they did.
They shifted it in a sense and said, hey, we're gonna change this up in 2 years after the draft. That's when you're really gonna screw things up. So when you look at it though, like, again, because you got a salary cap and you're spending less money, what is there a solution that you can sit there and think of? Because the quarterbacks have an argument, don't get me wrong, because they touch the ball every single offensive play, unless you're on the Wildcat or some sort of crazy scheme or something like that. But for the most part, they're touching the ball every snap on offense. So I get why they feel like they probably should be the highest paid guys on the team. I think linemen should be more near the top because of what they do to protect the quarterback and to open up holes for the running backs and all that kind of stuff. But I get it that, the quarterbacks are the generals of the offense. So they do deserve to have a good chunk of change. But at the same time, you have to sit there and go, if you're going to demand this amount of money, you can't turn around and complain about the crap you got around you because your team can't go out and sign a running back or sign a couple of receivers or sign a couple of linemen to keep your ass off the ground. So, like, where is the give at? And who's going to be the one that needs to step up and be like, okay, this is a problem. This is how we need to fix it.
And I don't know that it will, because the NFL union is so weak and so bad and doesn't take care of their players and never has, that they don't know how to fix it. And the owners are the powerful ones, and they don't really care, because they're making billions of money on TV. So, it's a broken system. Players that deserve the money are not necessarily getting it. The whole economic system in the NFL is screwed up and has been since the very beginning. And you can look at the financial aspects, you can look at the health insurance things, you can look at everything about the NFL and how players are treated, and it's broken and always has been, and probably won't get fixed because the players don't really have any power and their union won't really fight to get the power, and the owners and management have all of it. So it's a system that for the foreseeable future, none of that's going to get straightened out.
Well, all doom and gloom there, yeah, but let's talk one little piece of positivity, and that's the fact that Jaden Daniels and the Commanders are getting another weapon. And as long as he can stay healthy, could be a pretty good piece for Washington this next season as they pick up Deebo Samuel from 49ers for a 5th-round pick. So another weapon for Daniels, a young quarterback who really kind of showed lots of promise this year. But you have to be cautious because it seems like year 2 quarterbacks, even with successful rookie campaigns, have struggled in that second year. But the fact that they're able to get a quality wide receiver, if he stays healthy, could maybe help keep Daniels going down the right path.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a special talent. There's no doubt about that. And, with Dan Quinn and with the coaching staff, I think he'll be okay. Like you said, he'll probably take a little step back in the second year. Most quarterbacks do. That doesn't mean he won't make the playoffs or anything like that, but his numbers may not be the same as they were next year. A really interesting thing to watch, you added a wide receiver. The Commanders are one of the teams that apparently are really interested in Ashton Genty, the running back from Boise State. So imagine if they jumped up and made that move and brought him in to add to that offense, and the pressure that would take off of Daniels and put on defenses when you had that guy in the backfield with Daniels and, trying to guess, okay, is he going to hand off? Is it going to be – is Daniels going to hand it off? Is he going to throw it? Is Daniels going to run? What do we do defensively? That could be a really scary thought for any team. But, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how they move on and what they do, but I think he'll still have a really solid sophomore year.
Yeah, it's a very winnable division for them. I know that saying that you've got the Super Bowl champion in there with the Eagles, but the Giants and the Cowboys are not going to be good again next year. So it will be a battle between Philly and Washington. And even if they don't win the division, I think Washington has a real good shot of making the playoffs again next year and really making some noise.
What do you mean the Cowboys aren't good? Haven't you read Dak's
Oh,
quotes
I'm
about
sorry.
how they're just as talented as the Eagles and they should have won? Dak knows it. They're just as good as the Eagles are.
Oh yeah, 100%. Just as good as the Eagles at losing. As good as the Eagles are at winning, the Cowboys are that good at losing. So
Yeah. Dak's really good at throwing it to the other team's uniform.
he's just following in his predecessor's footprints. I mean, he knows that he keeps going the way he's going. He'll get a chance in the booth one day after he retires, and maybe we'll be able to pick out the plays that the Cowboys are going to run after he's gone.
Well, the last two prominent Cowboys quarterbacks, we should say, have both had pretty good careers in the booth. I mean, there have been some other quarterbacks in between there, but the last two of name have definitely made good careers in the broadcast booth.
Oh, was it? If you can't play, you coach. If you can't coach, you broadcast. So there you
That's
go.
right. That's it.
All right, let's jump over and talk some spring training baseball. The Cardinals are about a week or so into their spring training schedule. There have been some surprises that have kind of jumped out a little bit. There's been some trepidation in some of these players as well, but we'll talk about the big news that kind of dropped today. And I look at it, and you and I were talking about this before the show. And I think we both kind of agreed that this decision actually was not that bad of a decision. Quinn Matthews got his walking papers in a sense, sent back down to the minors today after having a pretty impressive debut against the Toronto Blue Jays. But you look at it and you go, and we talked about this the last couple of weeks, the fact that most of these pitchers, if they keep everybody up here, would only get about 2 innings of work every so often, not every fifth day. Hard to make a choice on, who is going to stay, who is going to go if you're only getting 2, 3, 4 innings of a look of these guys in spring training. So this move allows Matthews to start every fifth day and get stretched out a little bit. And I think the prevailing theory with the Cardinals, and this is from the organization themselves, that he will be with this team at some point this year. So it's not like they saw what he did in 2 innings and were like, whatever, we'll send him down. I think it was very intentional that they're like, okay, he competed. Yes, it's one of his first starts in spring training. Batters are still a little behind, but he was still very impressive. Now let's get him worked in every fifth day, get him used to that so that come May, June, we're bringing this kid up and letting him go.
Yeah, I think he did everything that you wanted him to do. As Cardinal fans, we're like, man, what are you talking about? We want to see this kid up here. We want him up here on opening day. That wasn't going to happen, primarily because, he only had 3 starts in AAA last year. He jumped through the system, but he only had 3 starts. He needs a little more work in the minors before you bring him up here. But, you've got him to start in the major leagues, in Major League camp. You did it against Max Scherzer. He outpitched Scherzer for 2 innings. And you did it against the Blue Jays team, and he got to go up against Bo Bichette. He struck out Vladimir Guerrero Jr. He had a very impressive showing. He opened some eyes nationally, even more than they already were. People, Sports Center, everybody were showing the highlights of, hey, this Cardinal kid just outpitched Max Scherzer for 2 innings. And so, you got the hype train going a little bit more. You got him a taste of what it's going to be like against really good major league hitting. And now he can go to AAA camp. Like you said, he can pitch every fifth day. You can let him get innings, let him work himself into a rhythm. And at some point this year, he's going to be back up here. Maybe is it in April or May? Probably not. It's probably going to be, June or July, or maybe not even until August when we see him, just depending on how the big league season goes. But, at some point this year, he's going to make his major league debut, and hopefully he's going to be in this rotation and at the top of the rotation for the next decade. So, we got a taste, and he's right where he needs to be. He showed he could do it, and now you just go to the minors and prove you can do it consistently at the AAA level, and it's just a matter of time before he'll be up here pitching at Busch Stadium.
Well, I think the really smart thing that the Cardinals did is they put him right next to Sonny Gray in the locker room, and he got a chance to kind of absorb what Gray is all about and kind of learn a little bit from him about his routine and his mindset. So when you know you've got an ace on your staff and you know you've got an ace that's coming up in your staff, the smart thing is to put them next to each other. It's exactly what the Cardinals did. And even in the short amount of time that he was sitting next to him, I think Matthews definitely learned a ton, and he's really going to show himself down the minors and really make it hard for the Cardinals to keep him down there.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, as long as he goes down there and does what he's supposed to do in AAA, it's just a matter of time before he's up here, and he'll be up here and hopefully really impactful at Busch Stadium in a short amount of time.
Well, let's talk about some more of the surprises that we've seen kind of in the first couple of weeks of spring training. And again, we're going to hit on a couple of hitters on this team. And again, early in spring, usually pitchers are ahead of the hitters just because hitters, for the most part, haven't seen live pitching in a couple of months. But the one that really stuck out to me. Oh, sorry, did I spoil it? Struck out. Nolan Gorman was struggling here for the first handful of games. It was over 12 with 7 strikeouts, just 1 walk coming into today's game. He did pick up his first hit of the spring. It was a double in the first inning, came around to score. But, we've seen with Nolan Gorman that there are stretches where he just swings and misses at everything. And we've got potential coming up in the minors for, multiple different positions, especially on the infield. And for Nolan Gorman, it was kind of his bat that got him up to this level. He's done a nice job acclimating himself to second base, but is there a termination line for him where the Cardinals look at it and they go, look, the power you've got is phenomenal, but we can't justify X amount of strikeouts to Y amount of home runs or Z batting average. Is there a termination line for that where maybe they look at offloading him, or are they seeing what they've done the last handful of years of getting rid of, young talent that was struggling and then succeed elsewhere, and they go, ooh, maybe we do hang on to him?
It's 10 at bats in the first week of spring training. How many guys around baseball are struggling and not doing? Mason Wynn didn't have a hit going into today. I'm not worried about it. If in 3 weeks, he's still struggling and doesn't have any hits, then we can talk about, man, it's spring training and maybe we need to start worrying. But how many times have you seen a guy go through spring training and do nothing, and then the regular season hits and they're on fire? So I don't take anything from spring training. As long as he's getting out there and playing, I'm fine with it. And as far as is there a line in the sand where you say that's it? Maybe, but when that is, it's in the off season. You let him play every single day. You let him get 600 at bats because he's never gotten that. You put him out there every single day. You let him play. You let him see what he can do. See if he can hit 40 home runs. And if he doesn't, and at the end of the year, if he's hitting 200 and he hit 25 home runs, then you talk about it and say, okay, maybe this isn't what we need, and maybe we move on. But this year is supposed to be the year where these kids get a runway, and we find out what they are. And if we're already talking 10 bats into the spring training about, oh man, we can't let him play, then we're not going to learn anything from this season. So this year is supposed to be about these guys having a chance to prove what they can do and getting that opportunity. And so you need to just let him go out there and play so that he's not thinking about, oh man, if I go out there and strike out 4 times today, am I not going to play for a week? He needs to be out there, get 600 at bats and see what he does.
So that's the disclaimer that we need to send out to all of Cardinal Nation, that this is the year where these young players are going to get a chance. And if they struggle, you're going to have to deal with it because we need to see what we have. And for all the fans that have complained about us trading away young talent, seeing them succeed at other levels, well, this is the year that you're going to see these young players get the chance that they've gotten in other clubs. Yes, they may struggle. Yes, this team may not make the playoffs. But if they're giving these young players a full year to showcase what they can do, it's going to be a win in the long run. So back down, step away from the ledge. Don't jump, because that's the expectation going into this year. So you have to realize that. Yes, it sucks. We're expected to win. This is a championship kind of franchise. But sometimes you have to take that step back to see what you have for the future.
Yeah, and the team's basically said that since the offseason last year. That they were going to give these guys a chance to play and figure out what they have, which they need to do. And it's what fans have asked for. Fans have said, oh, let the kids play. Fans were saying that last year in the middle of the season, let the kids play. So yeah, 10, you can't be, oh, it's 10 at bats and he's struggling. Get him out of here. No, you've got to let him play and see what they can do. And you need to do that with all of these kids. You need to let Victor Scott go out there and play. You need to let Jordan Walker go out there and play. Is it going to be ugly at times? Probably. Yeah, they're probably going to struggle because they've never had a full season. But, it also might be really, really good. But you've got to weigh that good with the bad, and they've got to get the opportunity to play and grow at the big league level if you're ever going to see anything. Because otherwise, if we just keep, oh, man, that's been 2 weeks and he hasn't done anything. He can't play. We got to sit him. Next year, we're going to be right back in the exact same spot going, well, is this guy good or is this guy good or what are we going to do with this? I mean, you've got to let these guys play and figure this out at some point.
Well, and you and I are both been around this for long enough that we know that it's going to happen. There's going to be lots of people that are going to complain about it. And you know what? You got to block it out if you're a fan and you're trying to stay positive. Block out the negative and stick with the positive, knowing that in the next couple of years, you got a lot of young players that are come up and make an impact. And you mentioned one of the ones that was a surprise here early on, and that's Victor Scott. 5 for 9, 5 runs scored, a triple, a home run, 3 driven in, 3 walks to 2 strikeouts, and 3 stolen bases. Again, spring training numbers, it's not always indicative of how things are going to go in the regular season against, pitchers that will pitch deeper into games in their starts. But it's a very good positive sign there for Scott being able to get on base ahead of the strikeouts, get the stolen bases, making contact, getting hits. I like what we're seeing from him. And again, I keep going back to last week's episode because we talked about this a lot. Guys like Victor Scott and Michael Ciani should be the ones that are getting those looks in center field. And Scott's really trying to showcase with his bat that he deserves to be in that lineup, despite the fact that they're trying to shoehorn Lars Nootbaar into that center field spot. But if Scott keeps playing the way he is right now, yes, it is spring training, but if he keeps playing like this, I have a hard time believing that he doesn't start as your starting center fielder on opening day.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think if he shows that he can get on base and hit with some pop and draw some walks and steal bases like we know he has the potential to do, I think he should be your center fielder and probably will be. And, let's just think about, he got a taste last year. Everybody was so excited about it, what he did in spring training, and everybody wanted him up here so bad last year. And then he got up here and he struggled and he went back down. But remember, he came back up at the end of the second, late in the season, and he looked like a different hitter. Think about 2 years ago. Think about when Mason Wynn came up in the end of August and September, and he couldn't hit anything. I think he hit, 121 or something in the end of the last month and a half. And so we went into spring training last year, and everybody's like, oh, man, is Mason Wynn going to be your shortstop? He's supposed to be, but I don't know if he can hit. Well, that little bit of time and then spring training, he figured it out, and we saw what he did last year. Who's to say that exact same thing doesn't happen to Victor Scott this year? He got, 2 tastes last year. He saw what it was like. He saw what he had to do. He changed his swing last year between the first time he was here and the second time he was here. He took what he learned and he figured it out, and he was a totally different player. And hopefully he's done that now, and he blossoms into the potential that we all thought he had going into last year. And that's what we have to look forward to and hope we get from Jordan Walker as well. Is, from I haven't seen Walker play yet. I haven't had a chance to really watch him, but from all the scouts and everybody that has seen him, he's made changes to his swing, and it looks like he's adapted and done the things they needed him to do. So hopefully, these guys are growing and learning from their mistakes and their struggles, and there won't be as many of those this year. So that, that has to be your thing. It's a trial and error, and you just have to give these guys opportunities to figure it out at the big league level.
And you got a new betting coach here as well, and that's kind of precipitated the change for Jordan Walker especially. But the fact that they're able to kind of make those adjustments with a brand new hitting coach as well, that's a positive sign too, because it shows that they're putting in the hard work. It shows that they are focused on the craft and trying to get better. And I think the perfect example of that is Victor Scott from last year. I was very high on him being on the opening day roster, thinking he should have been the starting center fielder. And then, yes, he did struggle in his first stint up here, but he did what he needed to do when he went down to the minors, like you said, and then came up and showed exactly why we were all excited about him at the beginning of this season. And now the fact that he's coming into this spring training, kind of continuing where he left off at the end of last year. Again, spring training numbers, wildly different than regular season, but it shows that that trend can be extended from the end of a season to the start of the season. And then if he comes into the regular season and continues that, that's just another big step for him going forward and gives you a young, fast player that you can get excited about. And again, not trying to make comparisons, but a Vince Coleman could be the kind of skill set that he has. And to have that kind of excitement in center field and on the base paths again, it's something that we hadn't seen in a long time. And last year we started to get a glimpse of it when Scott was here with what Mason Wynn has done. And yes, I mean, we're going to throw Lars Nootbaar in there because he is quick on the base paths. We're seeing that speed element that this team has lacked for a handful of years, and that's another exciting piece. And if Scott is one of those, pawns in all of that, that's going to be real exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it has the potential to be, and I've seen some baseball writers talking about the Cardinals, and they're like, this team it's just so hard. They could be really good, they could be really bad. It's going to depend on how these players progress and how the pitching progresses, and whether some of these veteran pitchers can improve or whether the young kids can step up and take spots. And it's going to be an interesting year. The first half is definitely going to be a chance to really kind of experience a lot of different things, because we just don't know what we're going to get from night to night, honestly.
Yeah, we don't. I mean, because Matz has looked halfway decent in his first couple of innings. Miles Michaelis, a 3.48 ERA already in spring training. So, I think we know what we're going to get out of that. Michael McGreevy is a guy that could potentially steal one of those 4 or 5 spots in the rotation as well. So there are a lot of question marks surrounding what this team's going to look like coming out of spring training, but there are some pieces that are trending in a positive direction, and it makes things seem like it could be better than you expect this year. And with the NL Central kind of being just a weird kind of roller coaster of a division, you're not sure who's going to actually be good in the Central. You might sneak in and accidentally win a Central Division crown this year with 0 expectations.
Well, and we see it happen every year where a team comes out of nowhere that you weren't expecting, and they end up winning a division or sneaking into a wild card. So yeah, I mean, it's just a year that you've got to go in with not a whole lot of expectations, hoping for the best, and hope these kids grow and blossom and turn into what we all expect them to be at some point.
Yeah, 100% agree. Let's stick with baseball here. And this is something that has become almost a yearly kind of occurrence, but a little bit different this year now that he has passed on. But, Rob Manfred is actually said to be considering a petition filed by Pete Rose's family that they put together on January 8th to have him reinstated and then eligible for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And, I think a lot of us thought that posthumously he probably would get reinstated and potentially elected into the Hall of Fame. But are you a little surprised that it has happened as quickly as it has, that Manfred's even considering it? I mean, it's not like he's said, yes, we're going to reinstate him and go forth, but the fact that he's considering it already, and maybe at the time that the next ceremony is held, could be announced that he's being reinstated. I mean, is that a bit of a surprise to you?
A little bit. How much of it has to do with Pete Rose's family, and how much does it have to do with President Trump going on Twitter the other day and blasting Major League Baseball for not already doing this?
I mean, I have that in my notes that it was announced that he was going to pardon Pete Rose, but possibly for tax evasion charges that he served time for. But I mean, still, the fact that Trump is pushing Major League Baseball to reinstate him, I think that definitely does play a factor into it. But again, I think we all agreed that when Pete passed, that was going to be the moment that Major League Baseball was going to say, okay, you did your penance, and now you don't get to celebrate being reinstated and going into the Hall of Fame, but we're going to give you the opportunity to get in. So I don't know if I look at it, I go, I don't know if that's something that I would want to celebrate Major League Baseball going, oh, well, you died now, so we're going to let you get back in. I don't know. That's just a really tricky thing to me, because I believe he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame because of what he did on the field. And there are so many guys in the Hall of Fame that did things off the field that we look at and you go, whoa, if he did that now, he would not be in. So the fact that they waited till he passed and are now considering reinstating him, it kind of leaves a bad taste in my mouth. And I know that Pete Rose's family wants to see him enshrined and reinstated and to clear his name and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I have to sit there and go, if I'm his family, why the hell would I even want to push it to get him in? Because MLB has treated him like this for so long.
Although you say that, and Pete was his own worst enemy in so many ways. I mean, the guy used to go to the Cooperstown Hall of Fame weekend and set up a shop and sell his merchandise right outside of the Hall of Fame ceremonies, and and just do things to thumb things at Major League Baseball that didn't really make them. It didn't endear himself to his former teammates or former players or to the commissioners or anything else. If Pete would have been a little bit more apologetic and seemed like he had some sense of remorse for any of it, I think Pete would have been in a long time ago. But that wasn't Pete. He wasn't going to admit that he did anything wrong, and he wasn't going to say he was sorry, and he was going to thumb his nose at baseball. And so now, I mean, I can understand his family wanting him to have the honor. His grandkids, great grandkids, generations of their family, they can take there and say, look what a member of our family did. I mean, he was a great baseball player. I mean,
Yeah.
Like you said, he absolutely deserves to be in there for what he did on the field. So yeah, I think at some point, I don't know that it's going to happen. It may not happen for another year or two, but I think at some point Pete will get into the Hall of Fame.
Well, and even when he did admit to it, it never seemed like it was like a truthful admission that he did it. I think it was more so along the lines of like, well, I'm going to say this, and maybe that gets me back in and gets me into the Hall of Fame. I don't think he ever had that conviction behind even his admission of the things that he did when he went on TV to talk about it. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. MLB and him were basically two hard-headed individuals going against each other, and they basically set themselves up to have this kind of thing happen. And again, I get it. You want to be able to say that your family member did what they did and deserved to be in the Hall of Fame and essentially kind of quote unquote clear your name. But I also look back and go, the fact that Shoeless Joe Jackson is still effectively banned is another piece that goes into it. But again, wildly different situation, different pieces of information that you know about. There's a lot of things that go into it. So I get where all of it kind of sits at this moment, but to have certain guys in that did things well worse than what either of those two did is a little bit grating for me as well.
Well, and I mean, we had a lot more proof that Pete actually did bet on baseball. I mean, there's still no proof that Shoeless Joe Jackson was actually involved.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that drives me nuts, because if you can't prove it, and I don't want to say that that's the only standard of thinking you should have, but for someone that had the career that he did and to label that on him, that's a tough one to take.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a shame that more people don't know who Shoeless Joe Jackson was, because if it wasn't for the Black Sox scandal, he would have been probably as famous or right there up there with Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb and all of those guys of that era.
100%. Could not agree more. If you don't know who he is, watch 8 Men Out. That was a phenomenal version of that Black Sox scandal. So check that one out. And, let us know what you think about the Pete Rose situation as well. Should he be reinstated and eligible for the Hall of Fame, or do you believe that even posthumously he should still be banned for quote unquote life? So let us know on our social media pages what you feel about that. And now at this time, let's jump over. Let's talk about college basketball, because we've got some local flavor that's in and likely getting in as well, and potentially getting in, as we've got 4 kind of local programs that have a shot, and really maybe even a 5th one if you count SIUE as well down in the OVC. Lots of different things have happened here in the last week. Obviously, we've seen Mizzou go down to Vandy and lose in a game that at the time they were doing pretty well in that first half, and then kind of lost it in the second, lost in overtime. You got a SLU program that has kind of gotten themselves into a good position as far as seeding for the A10 tournament. You have Illinois that had struggled the last handful of weeks, taking down number 15 Michigan today and maybe boosting their resume back up a little bit. And then you saw in there SEMO won the OVC men's regular season title outright. They will be the number 1 seed going into the OVC tournament, which gets going a little bit later this week. So they have a shot to get into the tournament. And if you're looking at bracketology, the way that they are set up, they would be in a play-in game. And if they won, they'd play Duke in the first round. So Yeah, I mean, be nice to sit there and be like, yeah, we got in and we got beat by Duke. But at the same time, you want to advance as far as you possibly can. But, just kind of looking at the fact that, again, the St. Louis area may have multiple teams in the tournament. That's a big feather in the cap. And we may have 4 potential local teams in the tournament this year.
That would be really cool. It makes it a lot more fun to watch the tournament when you have multiple teams from the area in there that you can kind of watch and get you more into it, watching more games and being more excited when you have that many different teams from the area locally that you can root for and kids you can root for. So, yeah, as many teams as we could get in would be amazing.
Let's kind of run down a couple of those teams that we were just talking about. Let's start with Mizzou, 21-8, 10-6 in the SEC. They sit 5th right now. So likely going to get one of those mid seeds in the SEC tournament that's getting ready to come up. They've got a great resume. Beat at the time number 1 Kansas, number 5 Florida, number 16 Ole Miss, number 14 Mississippi State, and then number 4 Alabama. They've got Oklahoma coming up at home on the 5th, and then they will be at Kentucky, or they will be facing Kentucky, who's sitting at number 12 on the 8th to wrap up their regular season. And last week we talked about it and said if they could go 3-1 in those games, I think that sets them up pretty nicely for a good seed in the SEC tournament. Well, obviously they're sitting at 1-1 right now, which means they really can't lose either of these 2 games if they want to kind of get themselves in a good position. But looking at it, Oklahoma at home probably can chalk that up as a win. The Kentucky one, that could be an interesting game for sure because that could also be about Kentucky kind of trying to position themselves for a good draw in the SEC tournament as well. I mean, that's the game that I've got circled as probably one of the most important ones for Mizzou in the next couple of weeks because it's not so much about seeding in the SEC tournament, but more about seeding in the big tournament that's going to matter. And I think if you can have another top 15 win on your resume, that gives you real good ammo.
Yeah. I mean, it's important that they win out these next 2 games. They should be able to handle Oklahoma, like you said, at home pretty easily. The Kentucky game is going to be a challenge. It always is. It's never easy when you go in Rump Arena, especially last game of the season. But, you need to win. You need to win both of these games to have a chance at the 4 seed in the SEC tournament and the double bye. And you've got to win both of these games and get some help to be able to still get that. Losing the game at Vandy last night really hurt your chances at that 4 seed, but you still have the opportunity. You just have to go out and take care of business and win these next 2 games and then hope you get some help. But yeah, if you can get that 4 seed, get that double bye, and then, that just helps you in the SEC tournament. And the farther you advance in the SEC tournament, the higher your seed is going to be in the big dance. If you can win a game or 2, you've got a really good shot at being probably a 4 seed. So I think that's what your goal needs to be right now. And, they definitely can do it. They had some lack of defense last night in key spots. They made some kind of bonehead mistakes. Coach Gates even kind of took the blame, said, he should have called a timeout before that last possession in regulation last night to set his defense, and he didn't, and it came down and it burned them. So, they've just got to play smart basketball the next 2 games, and they've got a really good chance to make some noise in the SEC tournament, even if they don't get the double bye. Even if they do have to play in that second round. They still have the potential to make a deep run in the SEC tournament, but the double bye would definitely benefit them. So we'll see how that goes. But I think they can make some noise in the tournament. And like I said, when it all comes out, I think they're going to be a 4 seed in the big dance.
Yeah, right now they're listed as a 5 seed in the East. That's the same side of the bracket that you have Duke and Tennessee as the 1 and 2 seeds at the moment. And obviously, Tennessee is a very, very tough opponent for Missouri. And, it would be a berth in the Final Four if they were to meet Tennessee, because Tennessee's at the bottom of the bracket. Mizzou would be up at the top, and you'd still have to get through number 1 Duke to get that, to that point as well anyway. But they've got themselves set up relatively nicely right now. And, again, we talked about it last week. They don't necessarily have to win the SEC tournament. I mean, if they do, that'd be phenomenal. But at the same time, you have to think about rest as well. If you get the double bye, that gives you that extra rest. You don't have to play as many games, and then getting into the tournament, you're a little bit rested. If you don't make it all the way to the championship game, you still have another couple of days of rest in there as well. Yes, it may affect your seeding. It may not be as high as you want it to be, but I think at that point, if you're weighing between a 4 and a 5 seed and 2 or 3 extra days of rest, I think you're going to take those 2 or 3 days of extra rest and get your guys healthy, which the game yesterday against Vandy, first time all year, no one listed on the injury report for Mizzou. So that's a good sign as well that they're starting to get healthy at the right time too.
Yeah, definitely. You definitely want to be as healthy as possible going into this tournament. But I really want that 4 seed. I want to avoid that 5 seed at all costs if possible.
Again, we've talked about it multiple times. Stay away from the 5 seed because there's at least one, if not two, 5-12 upsets. So don't give Missouri a chance to be another part of those numbers for sure. Now moving over to Illinois. Again, a big win against Michigan today, number 15. They're 4-6 against top 25 teams this year. One of those was that inexplicably scheduled game against number 3 Duke last week that they got blown out in. But they've also lost to Alabama, Tennessee, Michigan State twice, and Wisconsin. Now, they split with Wisconsin this year, so that's a good sign for them going forward. But they played some tough competition, and they started off great. They beat Mizzou in the bragging rights game this year. They had some early momentum, but then just kind of lost their way there with some sickness and some injuries that really kind of cropped up as they got deep into Big Ten regular season play. Looking at what they are right now, they've got one more game against number 20 Purdue on the 7th. But you look at Illinois, a team that not necessarily a Final Four contender, even on their best days this year. Are they a team that may bounce pretty quickly?
They're a team that I think can win a game or two. I think probably Sweet 16 is probably kind of their ceiling this year. I don't think this is a team that's going to go as deep as some of the teams we thought might the last few years. But even if they could get to a Sweet 16, that's not a bad run. So I think they win a game or two.
And right now they're listed as an 8 seed in the South bracket with Auburn at the 1, Iowa State at the 2. And, I look at that and I go, if Illinois puts together the game that they can put together, they have a chance of knocking off a 1 or 2 seed if they get to that point. But they're going to have to put together pretty much a string of clean games to get to that point and make that happen. But I look at it and I think you're right. I think Sweet 16 berth is probably, the top of the iceberg when it comes to their peak this year. If they get further than that, great. They overachieved. But if they don't, I think a lot of fans will look at that and go, yeah, they had a chance this year, but they just could not put things together. And I would think that would be another disappointing year for Illinois, even if they finish in the top 25. And if they lose in the first or second round, I think a lot of Illinois fans will think that's a disappointment.
Yeah, I mean, fans are going to always think that. I don't know that this team was thought to have, the ceiling that some of the teams the last few years have had. So, again, I think a Sweet 16, I think right in there, I think that's probably right where your expectations for this team should have been.
Well, they have a chance and are likely going to make the tournament. A team that is going to have to fight their way to get into the NCAA tournament will be SLU. They're in the A10, probably a one-bid league. Going to be your automatic qualifier that gets in. Right now, that A10 champion is listed as an 11 seed, which sounds about right. Even if it is SLU that gets that, I think an 11, 12 seed maybe would fit them perfectly. I mean, they've won 3 straight games, including a win over Loyola, who they're tied with right now for third in the A10. They're tied with Dayton and St. Joe at 10-6 in the A10. They've still got Dayton coming up on the 4th, which would be Tuesday, team they lost to at the end of January. And then they have Duquesne on the 8th. So, SLU has a chance to move up into that sole third place position, give themselves a good seed in that A10 tournament. And we've seen them go on runs in the A10 tournament and other tournaments that they've been a part of to get that automatic qualifier in a year that maybe they didn't have the year they were looking for. But for them in their first year under their new head coach, for them to potentially make a run and get into the NCAA tournament, that would be an impressive feat and justification for bringing in their new head coach.
Yeah. I think they can definitely make a run. Like you said, they're going to be in a good position going into the A10 tournament. The tournament's always tough, but the Billikens, like you said in the past, we've seen them make runs in that tournament, win that tournament. So anything's possible. And again, if you can get into the big dance in your first year, that would be huge for them, and just another building block for the program as you try to go forward.
Yep, and that's what they need to continue to do. Build, because they've had some successful seasons, but it's been a couple years since they've been in the tournament, and there's been excitement around the program. It's back now. over at SLU. All right, let's talk about this upcoming bracket challenge that we're going to be doing. We're going to put together a bracket challenge for anybody to join, and we're hoping to team up with some of the other hosts here on Livestream STL, get them involved so you can compete against, coaches and fans and other listeners of Livestream STL. See if you can match up against some of these known minds that have won championships and have been successful in the coaching ranks and things of that nature. So make sure you kind of keep a lookout for where we're going to be hosting that and how you can get involved and potentially what prizes might be on the table for a winner as well. We always have fun doing these because we can sit here and spew all we want about sports, but if we don't put up our own opinions against other people, who's to say if we're good or not? So you get a chance to prove yourself against us talking heads by joining our bracket challenge. We'll have more information on that coming up in the next couple weeks as we get closer and closer to March Madness.
Yep, and bracket challenges can always humble you because you think you filled out a really good bracket, and then it doesn't work out the way you want to more often than not.
You lose to the person that picks the best mascot is what happens. And I'm not going to label that on one side or the other because there are people all across the board that have different ways of picking. So we're not laying that on the feet of the female pickers because that's the easiest way to do it. A lot of people will be like, oh yeah, the girl that pops in there and just picks on them. It's not always the girls that picks the mascots. You've got a lot of smart analytical women out there, and you've got a lot, men are just men anyway, but right. Everybody has a unique way of picking. So do what you do to pick the brackets the way you want to pick it and see who comes out on top. So make sure you stick around and follow us to see how you can get involved in our bracket challenge as it gets closer and closer to March Madness.
Yep, it'll be here before we know it, a couple of weeks, and we'll be talking March Madness.
March Madness and opening day. That's like the best time of the year and just so happens to be within the same week, essentially.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, it might be a little chilly down at Busch Stadium on the 27th.
Yeah, make sure you dress warm, Scott, because that's going to be a long day.
Oh, yeah, I will. There's a nice little wind tunnel at Busch Stadium, especially on those cool spring and fall days. So I'll have multiple layers on, I am sure.
Well, you're going to have seniority here, and if you're part of Team Fredbird, you'll probably get a lot of warm areas that you'll get a chance to be a part of, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's some warm areas, but there's some really cold areas too. And those entryways to sections are wind tunnels. Let me tell you, you can be down in the sun sitting right behind home plate, and it's like 90 degrees, and you walk up that wind tunnel at the back of the section where you walk in, and it's like 30 degrees cooler with the wind like blowing straight in your face.
Dang. Yeah, I can see that being the case, though. I can 100% see that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh, boy. Well, it's getting closer, though, and I think there's still going to be some excitement in the air come opening day for Cardinals fans across the area.
Oh, yeah. There's always a little magic in the air on opening day.
Oh, you get the red jackets, you get the bunting, you get the Clydesdales. It's the perfect opening day. I know other fandoms have good opening days, but St. Louis has the perfect opening day.
Yep, nobody does it like the Cardinals, that's for sure.
That is for sure. Well, that's going to wrap things up for us tonight. I want to thank you guys for joining us. Scott, what do you got going on this week and getting yourself ready for high school stuff?
Yeah, I'm going to be doing some boys and girls district playoffs this week. So I'll be traveling all around the area. So I will be posting stuff on social media, I'm sure. But I'm going to be bouncing all around the St. Louis area doing some guys and girls basketball. So it will be a busy week for me.
Oh, that's the best is high school sports. I just got a chance to call the high school hockey championship. Packed crowd at Centene Community Ice Center. DeSmet took out Chaminade in that one 2-0. There's nothing like high school sports. I mean, there's just a different feeling for high school sports. I know college crowds have packed arenas and stadiums, and there's a vibe there, but for some reason, there's just something about high school sports that just amps you up just that much more.
Oh yeah, it can. It definitely can be an electric atmosphere, no doubt about that.
Well, make sure you follow Scott and figure out where he's going to be at this week and get out there and check out your local products because that's where it all happens. Support your local programs and you may see a star in the making at some of those high school events. Again, thank you for joining us tonight. We had so much fun talking baseball, hockey, college basketball, football, everything under the sun. Unfortunately, the Blues ended up losing 6-3, so we're just going to leave on that note because that game was winnable and they blew it. Power play for Dallas was phenomenal, 4 for 4 on 4 shots. So we'll leave that where that lies with the Blues. We'll be back next week for another episode of the Toasted Tavern. For my partner, Scott Tobin, I'm Michael Wagon saying thank you again for joining us and have a great week. We'll see you next Sunday right here on Livestream STL.